Hello and welcome everyone to the main event webinar this week. My name is Meeta Sahni and I'm really pleased to be joined by Emma Griffiths, our employment lawyer guest today. Hi, Emma.
Hello, nice to see you. Hi, everybody.
Hello, everyone. While everyone is settling in and getting comfortable for the next 30 or 40 minutes, Emma and I are going to be talking all things redundancies. We are looking at the impact of the autumn budget statement on employers and how they strategize for their employees going forward. We're looking at the recession and how that might impact businesses to rethink their people plan. And I'm really pleased to have you here, Emma, because we're going to be looking at redundancies as a tool that businesses sadly have to use sometimes, but actually thinking about what scenarios that they might be used. And of course, you're going to be walking us through the nuts and bolts and the facts around redundancies, just to freshen that up in everyone's minds today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's another one of those uncertain periods. I think we've had quite a few of those, haven't we, on and off over the last few years, and uncertainty leads to, businesses revisiting what their needs are. And redundancies, as you say, is one tool that's available to organisations as part of a restructuring.
Indeed. So before we jump into the content, I would just like to show everyone that we have a chat box in the room today, and the most impactful way to make use of this time that you've dedicated to this topic is to share your thoughts, share any questions that you might have. You are very welcome to just come along and listen and make notes. But I find that if you do have a challenge that you have or a question, you've got myself and Emma at your disposal for the next 30 to 40 minutes, where we can maybe even fix that challenge before you have to go off and get back to work today. So that's what we try to do. So let's keep it interactive if we can. That would be great, and keep the comments coming. So in terms of what we're going to cover and the sort of layout of today, I was looking at 3 or 4 different areas. So first of all, looking at how the autumn budget will have impacted businesses and the shift in thinking for organizations, how to support people in redundancy processes. I think it's all well and good talking about the process, but it's not a bubble, is it, Emma? When someone's doing a redundancy process, it's not just the people in consultation that are impacted. Everyone around gets a real sort of shake up as well.
Absolutely, but it's not just the one person that's being affected. If it's just one person, it's the team around them. You've got potential survivor guilt from people. Somebody's absent from a team going forward, and also it's remembering that for the people that are impacted, everybody that's running the consultation or the people that are affected by redundancy have whole lives as well. So it's a human impact, every redundancy.
Very much so, and mental health and well-being are right up there in terms of priority for organizations, not just to do the right thing, but also because people watch. And if a set of redundancies are put into the environment, but the support isn't given, there are some people that will see that as a real negative reflection of the organization they work for, and outgo your skills walking out the door, all those skills that people have spent the last 2 years scrabbling and are still so short of, so it's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, many organizations will go through a fairly painstaking process of selecting who they want to keep. And they've selected them because they've decided that person is of value to the organization for whatever criteria they've determined. But if you don't keep those people engaged, you're quite right. You've gone through the pain of making sure that you keep them and losing others. And then, as you say, they walk out the door because they've not been engaged or they've not liked what they've seen in terms of the process that you've carried out.
Absolutely. So today, Emma and I are going to walk through not just redundancies, but how you as an employer can protect the world that you want to retain for future success. And then we will be summing up with the details and the facts and figures as well. So Emma, when you and I were talking about the autumn budget, we were saying that, God, it was this huge delivery of lots of tax issues and, shifts in borrowing and all that kind of thing. But actually, for employers, there's just a couple of very specific areas that I think are worth noting. First of all, the rise in national living wage has gone by 9.7%. That's a big hike, up to £10.42, and that will be effective from April 2023. Essentially what they're saying is that they want to benefit the lowest workers in this. But what are your thoughts on that? Like, we know that, again, there's the right thing to do, but there's also a reality for organisations who are bearing the brunt of this cost.
There are, and I mean, the reality with the national minimum wage is it goes up every April. And the last few rises have been steeper, but I think it's just a case of counting the cost and preparing now, really understanding where it applies. There was a change a couple of years ago to the national living wage that it used to apply to over 25s only. It now applies to over 23. So actually that probably had a bigger impact. This is just a case, I think, of employers of doing their maths and making sure that they can continue to operate. And if they can't, then obviously that feeds into the wider topic that we're talking about today.
Indeed, and redundancies are just one tool that employers can engage to think about how they cost up their people, look at the skills required. There are other scenarios. I know in the pandemic, a lot of organisations took people from 5 days a week down to a collective 4 days a week. Is that something that is legal and allowed, or is that something that would bring lawsuits galore?
If you just imposed it on people, you would get lawsuits galore. But actually, if it's done as part of consultation and with employee consent, then absolutely, there are lots of creative ways of doing that, aren't there, in terms of reducing core days, reducing days of the week that people work. And actually, that's one of the things you can do as part of a redundancy program. If you were to do it, you don't have to do it with a redundancy program. You could just go out to a workforce with a proposal. But one thing you could do in considering ways of avoiding redundancy is say, well, actually, okay, there is a way in which we could all pull together, we could avoid this, and that would be by everybody cutting their hours by a day a week for the next 3-6 months. And if you get buy-in and people agree, then great. The issue comes where you've got some that agree and some that don't, which is why it happens a lot less frequently.
Yeah, I've not seen it outside of the pandemic, but it's certainly a tool at people's disposal. And in terms of, employers, how they engage with their people, talking about the future, something you and I were talking about in the sort of as we were warming up, was the fact that when we're reading the papers now, when we're looking at what's happening out there for business owners and people leaders, and just trying to understand like what trends are there and what we need to be aware of. And for us advising businesses, it seems that there's either the really behemoth-sized organizations culling thousands of people, like you've got Twitter and you've got Amazon have just announced that they're going to be cutting people well into 2023, as are all the big tech firms. But then if you look at the news and you look at the impact of the rising, cost of living, it seems like small business owners are being super affected as well because of electricity and, the national living wage and things like that. Is that what you're finding as well?
Yeah, the redundancies that I'm getting through are probably what I would describe as tweaks to organizations. So I think a lot of my clients, and a lot of anecdotally through employees that come through our doors as well, there were lots of big changes with COVID, post-COVID, a lot of restructures, a lot of business that folded or changed their business model or changed the numbers in which they ran with or how they operated as an organization. So a lot of the big changes, I think, have happened. And you're right, there are some big tech firms doing some big things. But those aside, I think the organizations that I'm hearing from with redundancies are small tweaks. So it's where they've tried perhaps to go back to where they were post-pandemic and realized actually the world's changed. So we might not need this exact role doing this thing. We might just tweak it slightly and change the focus, which might lead to a change in the skill set and the people that we need to do that. Or it might be actually this department's doing great, but this one we actually are probably a bit top heavy, or we might not need quite the same management structure. It's the tweaks rather than the big restructures that we're seeing coming through the door at the moment. I don't know how that's impacting on your clients and what you're hearing.
I mean, we're finding that there is certainly a demand. The talent shortage, the skills shortage is still very much out there. Unfortunately, there is also a huge reduction in people available for work. Apart from, apparently, I was looking at the stats of the number of people born, in the baby boomers years versus the 1990s. So actually the number of people going into the workplace is down by something like 10-15%, which I thought was crazy. So apart from the fact that there's a skill shortage, there's also, a real human reason that there's less people. And then, of course, for us, with our double whammy of Brexit and the pandemic, plus now over 50s are very economically inactive, and it's affecting the labour work market hugely at the moment. So we are in a perfect storm in London.
Yeah, and you can actually add into that, unfortunately, the problems with health and social care, because I shared an article, a BBC article on LinkedIn yesterday, and it was talking about the unaccounted members of the workforce. And essentially there's an extra 500,000 people that could be working but aren't fit to work because they're on the waiting list, or because they're doing additional care for family members that they wouldn't need to be doing if there were the support in place. So, and also for employers, and what I'm hearing from employers, as well as the fact that they're struggling to find people, the people that they're finding are just so expensive. Because the market out there, I think. And I think that's probably the one good news story if you are a person that is perhaps joining this because you might be affected by redundancies yourself, or somebody that might be affected by redundancies yourself. I'm hearing that it's an employees market out there, actually, in a lot of sectors and industries.
I would say that's pretty much across the board, that it's an employees market. I don't think there's one sector that says, yeah, we've got enough people. Not one.
Yeah.
So that is the reassuring thing. And actually part of the support around redundancies is outplacement support. So where organizations can really put their arm around an employee that they're having to say goodbye to, is to say that we can help you not only deal with it on a personal level, but we can help you on a professional level to get back on your feet, looking for a role, rewriting your CV, getting some coaching to be in the right frame of mind. And there are so many opportunities out there. So...
And actually, the cynic in me says there's a bit of good news for employers making redundancies in that as well. And that if there are jobs out there, and there are jobs out there that are better paid and easily obtained, there's perhaps less likely to be employment tribunal claims for unfair dismissal on the redundancy alone. Yeah. Because actually people will say, okay, we can step into another job. So actually, why would I want the hassle of making this claim? Yeah. When there's, when it's very hard to get work, that's when the claims increase, because people have got to get an income in one way or another.
Indeed. And we've just got 100% from Karen. So thank you, Karen. She is aligned with what we're saying. So it must be what everyone's experiencing there. It's about doing the right thing. And I think that's the hard thing about redundancies, isn't it? Because really it's the right thing from an employer perspective. They've looked at the landscape. They've done the numbers. They have spent a lot of time and money hiring, investing, training. But here we are, and if an employer were to look at not the benefits. The benefits obviously is the cost reduction. Are there other reasons why employers might do redundancies? I suppose maybe there was a TUPE.
Yeah, I mean, TUPE is a whole other discussion to go with, slightly different. And actually people transfer across rather than are made redundant.
Yeah.
That's definitely a topic for another day.
We'll park that.
Yeah, other reasons that people might do redundancy, though, is it's not always cost saving. As you say, cost saving is one, but actually sometimes it's about saying we don't need those two management people. For example, you've got two senior managers. Actually, we don't need that. We need to streamline, not because of cost saving, but because actually of efficiency. And I know like government will use efficiency savings to mean cost savings, but actually when you've got, an SME business, you can look at that and go, hang on a minute, there is no need for these two separate roles here. So it might be genuinely streamlining, restructuring.
Well, absolutely. It has to start with where the business is and where they need to go, and then looking at the workforce and establishing, because sometimes they will rehire very quickly afterwards. We've got involved with organizations where they say, we've just done a restructure, we had to make some redundancies. And again, it's a real fine line that an organization has to walk with why they're making redundancies. As you said, if there are efficiencies, sometimes it's a change of strategy because of the market or
and you might have a redundancy going on at the same time as recruitment's alive. That's not unusual, because you might have a change in focus of a team, and you might not need, I don't know, that number of senior people, but you might be able to have somebody with a slightly different twist to what they do. So yeah, absolutely. Another very common reason, and I suppose actually if you go to the statutory definition of redundancy, there's three things. One we haven't talked about is place of work closure. So actually, if your workplace is closing, that's a natural redundancy situation.
And by that, do we mean a business that might be insolvent or going into administration or something like that?
If it's going into insolvent and administration, yes, but then often what people do if it's actually absolutely going to fold is that they don't even necessarily make the redundancy process, and the insolvency administrators will pick up that process, and the state, the Redundancy Payments Office, picks up the statutory payments on that. But no, if, for example, you operate 3 sites and you've decided you want to close Manchester and you want to open in Birmingham.
Right, yes, right.
Be as simple as that, or you've decided actually you need less sites. So first is your place of work redundancy, and then if you look at the other definitions of redundancy, it's the job is no longer needed. So for example, I don't know, you run a printing press and everything's going online, but you're carrying on in your business, but you don't need people to operate a printing press anymore, so that job's gone. Or it's the job of the person at the place where they do it is no longer needed. So for example, you do a specific role out of Birmingham, you're not going to do it out of Birmingham anymore, you're going to do it out of Manchester. So you place of work redundancy for that person. The site might still be operating, but you no longer need that job. So that's always the start point, really, is go back to that legal test and go, well, have we got a redundancy? Because often I will get a phone call and it's so-and-so isn't performing, we need to make them redundant.
Then, that's illegal.
Then you have to step back and unpick and work out what we're doing and why.
We've just had a comment from Heidi, who also actually mentions that sadly a very common situation is where startups run out of money. And I'm sorry to hear that you've been made redundant, Heidi. We hope that you'll get some insight, but we are also available outside of our environment here. Both Emma and I will be sending out recordings of today's session, and actually that's for everyone watching, whether now or the recording afterwards. But please do reach out. We're here to help. We have lots of knowledge and expertise on the ground, but actually real live current situations that might be, expertise that might be useful to you. So please don't hesitate to reach out and we can help you on a specific day.
I think I speak to both of us when I say we wouldn't charge for an initial call. If you wanted to pick up the phone and have a chat and understand where you are and if you have any rights as part of a process, then obviously do for either one of us. And the scenario that you mentioned is really common, isn't it? A startup going through a funding round, because there's often a funding round planned and promised, and if it doesn't hit, then unfortunately it does lead to people being in your situation. And I echo what Meeta said. I'm really sorry you're in that situation. It's tough.
I mean, unfortunately, we are looking at an uncertain set of, a good year, I think they're saying, ahead. In some ways, if, like Einstein said, time is linear. If I'm out on a date, time goes like that. If I'm, working or sitting at a bus stop waiting for a bus, it feels like every second feels like forever. And I think that's what this year's about coming. It's such a game of two halves as well, isn't it? Because you've got, as we said, small and large organizations, what I'm hearing from, but then you've got this middle level where actually they seem to be in that same struggle for talent, having done their restructure in the pandemic, and therefore just pushing forward. So Heidi, there's definitely opportunity out there. So give me a shout afterwards if you want to talk more about that.
I think what you've said there is a metaphor for the whole economy, isn't it? There's people really struggling, there's people doing super well, and then there's everybody else in the middle just trying to get started, keep going, and hopefully we will. One thing on budget and mini budget, which isn't redundancy related, which is just worth touching on, is IR35. Off payroll working rules, which, if you remember in the Liz Truss Kwasi Kwarteng mini budget, IR35 was going to be out, and then 2 minutes later it's back in. So I suppose the headline and the autumn statements kind of confirmed it is there are no changes. The IR35 rules, the off payroll working rules, will continue to operate as they always have. That brief idea of them disappearing was a blip and is not. They're not disappearing. So just for anybody that has any confusion as to where we are with that, just thought it's worth reiterating that point.
The rules stand as they have for a number of years.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So I guess it's probably time to get into the nitty-gritty, because what I'd love to do for the next period of the session is to talk about the sort of refresh on the facts of redundancy and how to manage it on the ground, but then also would really like to talk about how organisations can manage and support the whole team through it. So where do we start? Where would you like to start on that, Emma?
So I think first is again sort of reiterate what a redundancy is. So you've got a place of work closure, or you've got a job that you propose is no longer needed.
Yeah.
Either in a location or at all. You know, you don't need that job at all, or you don't need that job at a place where an individual works. What it's not is personal to that individual or about their performance. Redundancy is from time to time used as a mask for poor performance. It is interesting that a lot of the performance management processes disappeared with the people that were made redundant during the COVID pandemic. So it is often used as a mask for that. But in general, and what it should be, is about actually structuring your team for success.
Yeah.
So what roles do you need? Then you've got to think about, well, how do you do a redundancy process? And your first question there is how many people are affected? Okay. So, and that the reason that matters is there are two different types of redundancy process to go through. One involves collective consultation, either with trade unions or employee representatives. And the other is where you've just got solely one-on-one consultation. And what determines that is how many people are affected, how many roles you're proposing to lose. So if you are proposing to dismiss 20 or more people at one workplace in a 90-day period, so there's three thresholds there, 20 or more across a 90-day period, and you have to look back and forward in a single workplace, then you trigger collective consultation and you trigger a minimum 30-day consultation period, which can feel fairly painful for everybody affected, in all honesty. If you are talking about 100 or more people, so if you're in one of these large scale redundancy programs, again, 100 or more people in a 90-day period at one workplace, you trigger a 45-day consultation period. Years ago, it used to be 90-day, now it's 45. It's what P&O spectacularly failed to do.
They had all of 0 days notice, didn't they? That was shocking.
They had all of 0 days notice. They'll have paid everybody out for the privilege of doing it. And I sincerely hope they're still reaping the PR costs of it, to be honest, because it's not any way to treat anybody. But that's your first thing, is how many people, because that will dictate your consultation period. If you've got 19 or less people across that 90-day period, then it becomes much less formal, much less structured. Another thing to look at is the length of service of the people that are affected. Because if somebody has less than 2 years service, the reality is they have less in the way of employment rights. They're still protected from discrimination, so you couldn't pick somebody for a protected characteristic, sex, race, etc. But if their only claim is that they've been unfairly selected for redundancy just because of genuine unfairness, then they would struggle to get a claim over the line. So
if there isn't a protected characteristic query and it's less than 2 years, you don't really have any rights to not be.
No, there's certain other exceptions. There's certain automatic unfair dismissals. So, for example, you can't dismiss somebody for redundancy because they've blown the whistle or because they've raised a health and safety concern. There are some additional protections. I would always say, and this goes for any redundancy process, talk it through with somebody. Talk it through with an HR professional, talk it through with an employment lawyer, because you will save yourself a small fortune by having the discussion at the beginning than at the end. But yes, in principle, you're absolutely right. So you've got an idea of what's where. The most common pitfalls is that the decision's already made going into the process. And that somebody sits down with somebody and says, I'm going to have to make you redundant. We're going to have to make you redundant.
So that very first consultation conversation should not be that you're going to be made redundant. The wording is, or should be,
proposal. It's all about proposal. So once you've done your sort of first bit of homework in terms of, okay, we do have a redundancy situation that ticks the box of what a redundancy situation is, then we know how many people are affected. The next step is plan your process. So if you have a collective process, you need to elect representatives or use your trade union if you've already got a trade union representative. Then there's a list of information that by law has to go to those reps. And once that letter with that information goes to the representatives, that's when your 30 or your 45 days starts. So actually, it doesn't even start from the minute you start electing reps. There is a time lag. So again, it's important just to plan and you know, any redundancy, you've got a collective, you want your timeline and your project plan ideally. And if you haven't got that, and by the way, just to go quickly, stick on the collective for a minute, you do your collective consultation, you talk to reps about ways of avoiding redundancies, the money that's going to be involved in redundancies, who's been selected, etc. And then it goes down to one-to-one consultation. And I'll focus on one-to-one consultation because I suspect the majority of our audience won't be dealing with collective consultation. And if they are, they know who to call. But if they're not, then it moves on to one-to-one. So then your next step is to select who's at risk. Some people will be self-selecting because, say there's only one employment lawyer in a firm, you've decided you no longer want to do employment law, then I'm self-selecting, aren't I, if I'm the only employment lawyer in the firm? I'm at risk because my role is no longer needed. I'm the only person that does that role. So I'm naturally selected. However, say there's 6 employment lawyers and you decided you need to go from 6 to 4. Okay, you've got to select who the unlucky 2 are, who are at risk.
So that's more complicated.
Yeah, definitely more complicated and much more rife for challenge, because then you get people saying, well, why her and not me? Why her and not me?
So what's the criteria?
Absolutely. And every organization will have different criteria. There's no, you know, this is the dream tick list. What is important is that it is objective and measurable and fair as far as you possibly can, because as soon as it's subjective, then 1, who's the judge of that? 2, way more open to risks of discrimination.
So always having it in writing and being very clear about what the criteria are. It could be years of employment, could be maybe success, sort of achievements in the previous number of years, how many years that is, and then essentially having a bit of a matrix of scoring everyone against that.
Exactly right. Things like, is there any live disciplinary? If you've got a sales role, how are you doing on your targets? You know, are there any adjustments that need to be taken into account as well? So, for example, if somebody's got a disability and they've had a reduced target, make sure you score them on the basis of the reduced target, not the higher inflated one. So, absolutely, have your matrix. Once you've decided your matrix, then you write to the person that's at risk and you explain that they are at risk of redundancy. And again, it's not that they will be made redundant, it's that they are at risk. There is a proposal to reduce the people from this to this for this reason, or there is a proposal to remove this role for this reason. It's subject to consultation. They're invited to a consultation meeting. Come along and discuss it. So you give at least 48 hours of notice to the consultation meeting. And then you are one-to-one with them. You don't have to give the right to be accompanied, but I would as best practice. So it gives them the right to be accompanied by a colleague or a trade union rep. Have somebody with you as a note taker if you're running that meeting, because as much as people think they can run a meeting and take notes, experience says they don't do it as well as having someone else in the room.
That's pretty people and time intensive, isn't it? I mean, you look at an organization that's 4 people in a room, maybe, you know, up to 10, 20 times, and all of a sudden the organization starts to feel less happy, less engaged, less productive. You know, what's your sort of take on that? How should employers be? You know, I think it's really about not being sort of tunnel vision on this, isn't it? And understanding that there's a bigger impact.
Absolutely. And I think there's a few different elements to unpick there. One, you've got everybody else that's not affected, but that knows this is going on. For them, I've worked in those situations when I've worked in organizations where there's been redundancies going on and I'm not affected, but I know it exists. And it's not nice. It impacts morale. It makes people feel uncertain. It makes people go and look, frankly, at what other roles are out there because they suddenly feel unsafe.
And I think that's where communication is not just for the people that are in consultation, but actually talking about the redundancy and the fact that it's going on should probably be over the entire organization. Every employee should be made aware of the fact that redundancies are being considered, that there is a fair process.
It's so hard that everybody should be informed. It totally depends, I think, because sometimes it might be better to do a redundancy quietly, just where the small number of people are affected. No, it gets announced. But you're right, there are others in which you have to be quite open about the fact you're saying, we're going through this, but actually, do you know what? If you're not at risk, you are okay. You know, your role is not something, and this is why we're doing this restructure, actually is for our future success, not because we're in trouble, but because we've identified a future.
We could be if we didn't do this. And that makes your roles, everyone who we would like to keep in our world, more secure, and therefore, you know, hopefully building towards greater success and happiness for everyone. And I think the problem is that if people hear through third parties that something is going on, they make assumptions that aren't true. And often what you imagine is far worse than the reality. And, you know, one of the things that I've seen happen again and again is that an employer will, you know, create a set of people that are going to go through the consultation period, potentially with redundancy at the end. But then they have all of the ones they've signposted that they want to keep. They want the skills, they want the cultural alignment, they want those people to stay adding value. But what ends up happening is they deselect and say, I don't like the way you dealt with that, Mr. Employer. I'm going to look for a new job. Yeah. So I think it's really important for employers to not only do the process fairly, which I know we're walking through, but also have another layer of support for the individuals going through the process, but also have a layer of support for the people that are not going through the process that might be unsettled. It's a big job.
It is a big job, and it's a lot's in the planning. And there is a lot, you know, it is worth taking your time to plan that and structure what's where. In terms of support, a lot of organisations will have the employee assistance programme. It does not hurt to remind people that it exists. HR will be super busy, but actually, if you can have somebody that's available for people to drop into, it massively. That might mean bringing in an extra HR consultant to operate part of the redundancy process to free up the person that is known to your team to be there and to be a face and to be able to listen. And also just having your managers briefed and maybe knowing some of the talking points, a bit of what they can say, what they can't say, where the lines are, just so that they can reassure their teams. There's a lot to say all of that.
It's the comms. I'm a firm believer that everything is made or broken on communication.
Absolutely.
You know? So it's and I like what you said about the plan. It's almost having the plan and allocating responsibilities, and people can see the whole journey where you are, where we're trying to get to, and individual responsibilities on there, and pulling everyone together, because it is hard. Nobody wants to do it. Nobody wants to have to make redundancies.
Almost the worst is when people don't engage in that, though, is when they put their head down, when they want to hide from it, when they don't want to do the process, so they're awkward in the meetings, because it's not nice, you know, to sit face to face with somebody that you have worked with for a number of years and tell them that unfortunately they may no longer have a job, particularly when they might be given heart, soul, whatever it may be. That's a tough thing. So you've got to be in the right frame of mind and planned and prepared and able to do it. And then to go out and face the challenge from everybody else that might be coming at you. You know, it's a tough situation to be in. And people need to be prepared for that. It's often a rocky ride, but you get to the other end of it and it's the right thing to have done. Absolutely. But you've got to
the pain is in the change, isn't it? And you want to also know that as an employer, you have handled it fairly. One, because you know there's nothing coming at you. You know, you can sleep well at night knowing that, one, you've treated people well and fairly and legally. Two, if you can, give them extra support. Think about counselling, additional face-to-face meetings. You mentioned the employee assistance program. Maybe the mental health first aider can get involved. Maybe help them with the outplacement. That's something we do for our clients on our consultancy side, is deliver advice and coaching on, if you are in this situation, how you can go from looking for a role to be well established in a new role in a new organisation, maybe even happier than where you are now.
And that's part of the consultation, actually. That's often dealt with if you've got collective consultation with reps. Part of that process will be about, okay, are you going to offer outplacement support? Are you going to, what are you going to put in place to assist our transition out of the workplace? Are you going to pay in lieu of notice rather than make people work notice, because it gives them freedom, flexibility immediately.
Look for another job, absolutely.
And also going into that, how you have selected, one option to think about is voluntary redundancy, because actually, if you can deal with most of your redundancies through volunteers, the whole dynamic of it is very different, isn't it? Because if your employees know that actually everybody that's leaving have put their hand up to go because for whatever reason for them it's the right thing, they're great. And that's much less likely to be challenged, because you've got people that have said they want to leave, therefore much less likely to be a fairness issue. there is always a risk on voluntary redundancies that the wrong people put their hands up.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Could you offer a voluntary redundancy from a smaller pool, or does voluntary redundancy have to be across the company?
It depends on what you need as an organisation, because usually it will be you need to lose from a particular department rather than a total. I mean, occasionally you'll get a thing where there's a total headcount reduction, and it largely doesn't matter where or why people are going.
Yeah.
Mostly it will be, okay, we can take volunteers from XYZ department or XYZ role.
Okay.
Even
so you
then,
can be targeted in that.
Absolutely, you can be targeted in that, because you want to make the redundancies that you want to make. You don't want to suddenly, you don't want to decide that you're reducing your sales force, but then actually, it's a different team. It's the finance team that decide they want to go. That leaves you with a very sticky situation. So now absolutely you can target. If you've got a group of people, you can say, okay, from this group, we're going to invite volunteers. You can also reserve the right to reject a volunteer. You can always, and you can always say, I'm sorry, we're not going to give. Now that's a whole minefield, because you've got
a can of worms.
Yeah. One, why haven't you allowed them? And two, you now know that they want to stay with you. So I think
it's a risky one. With
volunteers, you've got to be careful what you wish for and prepared to accept. I think largely that you'll get volunteers that that they may be the ones you want, they may not. So think twice. It's always a good thing to think about. But if you genuinely just need to lose people and it doesn't necessarily matter who, then offer volunteers, absolutely. And you do that as part of the consultation process.
So you could have voluntary redundancy as part of the process. And I know that part of the process is looking for another suitable role for these people.
Yeah. So consultation, few boxes you need to tick in your consultation meetings. One is, why are they at risk? So why have they been selected? Why is that person at risk? Why are you proposing the change you're proposing? And then
that's a business case, isn't it?
Your business case, absolutely. And then thirdly, moving on to the point that you said, what can you do to avoid redundancies? So what can you as an organisation do? What have you as an organisation considered? Now, one that will be, there might be some alternative roles elsewhere. You might not think that employee has the skills or the interest in those roles. Give them the vacancy list, tell them about the role. Don't decide what's right for somebody else. And there's case after case after case of, employers deciding that somebody doesn't have the experience. Well, actually, they don't know what experience that person may have had elsewhere. So offer the roles and
re-interview. Absolutely.
But go through that process of, okay, and also if you can't think of any ways of avoiding redundancies, if you think there is nothing, I've got nothing here, that doesn't mean you shouldn't have the conversation. In that case, you say, look, we've really thought about this, but we have no ways of avoiding that we can think of. What have you got? What can you come up with? And then listen, and don't instantly say no. You might instantly think this is not going to work, but what you do is say, okay, I'm not quite sure how that might work. Talk me through, discuss some challenges, and then say, fine, thank you. I'm going to take that away. I'm going to really think about it, and I'm going to come back to you at the next consultation meeting. Because again, no, the instant decisions, that's where you end up with consultation looks like a sham. If consultation is a sham, you've got unfair dismissal risks. So go away, consider it. You probably go away from your meeting with a list of things to consider, list of questions from the employee. Go back, have another consultation meeting a couple of days later, go through your answers, go through those points again, alternative roles, why, where, how, etc. And if you come to the point at the end of that meeting where nobody has got anything, then you can confirm a redundancy. If you end up in a situation where you've got more questions, have a third consultation meeting. There is no harm. And then when you confirm a redundancy, do it in writing. You don't have to give a right of appeal, but I think you should as best practice. And secondly, because if you get challenged, if you're going to be challenged, much better to be challenged through your internal mechanism first, where you've got a chance to put it right, than the first thing you hear being the employment tribunal claim landing on your doormat.
Yeah, absolutely. And as hard as it is, you want to be able to say goodbye with positive footprints, because actually you don't know where your business will be in a year or two, and you might want to actually keep some of these people in your peripheral vision for, hiring in the future. We advise our clients a lot to, when they are thinking of restructuring, thinking about retraining. We offer training to, a lot of it is in communications and upskilling. And, you know, when you've got people who have the right attitude and the right fit, you can teach skills. And in this day and age, when there is such a shortage of the right people going into the right organizations, think twice about if there is another place for them. That's what I would say. And I think it would go a long way in terms of your other employees that, you know, watch how you work and following best practice. And you are a business, you are an organization with objectives and strategic outcomes that you want to get, but be open-minded, I would say, to
and that's, yeah, that's the whole point. And actually I wrote down common pitfalls, and the first one I wrote down was the decision's already made.
Yeah,
you know, if you go into it with that, and then the second one is how you treat people in that process. You know, how you treat the people that are at risk, how you treat the people that are, and it changes. People will give and give and give to an organization. They'll be treated badly in a redundancy process, or they'll watch their colleagues be treated badly, and it just is a massive mindset shift.
Yeah,
so
it snaps and there's no going back.
No, absolutely. So yeah, absolutely how you go through that process. And I think the other thing I would just also flag on common pitfalls whilst I'm doing them is last in, first out. Please do not use it as your only criteria. Preferably don't use it at all. If you are going to use it, do not use it as a sole criteria, because it is a massive age discrimination risk, because last in is younger employees.
Yeah. That's a very, very good point, and one to highlight for our audience, because perception is reality as well. You know, people may not have a case, but they can bring a case, and again, create all of this sort of stress, tension for them and for yourself, and bad blood throughout the organization, which should be more, potentially even more costly long term than the actual lawsuit itself.
Well, this is it. You know, you can do the best process you want, but there's always a risk somebody will bring a claim, but you've put yourself in the best position of defending it. And the other thing that we often do with clients on redundancies is settlement agreements, which is, you know, you give somebody a little bit more than they would be entitled to through their statute. And just also, I suppose we should quickly touch on what you would be entitled to if you're made redundant, which is Statutory Redundancy Pay, which there's a brilliant calculator on the gov.uk website, very easy to find, which will tell you what people are entitled to. Notice, payment in lieu of notice, payment in lieu of accrued but untaken holiday. They're really the broad. There might be bits and bobs of perhaps a bonus scheme or permission that you have to prorate, but broadly speaking, it's statutory redundancy, notice, and your holiday. But what people will do often is, organisations will do, is pay a little bit more, give somebody a bit more of a soft landing, and do it by way of a settlement agreement. So settlement agreement will be an agreement that the individual signs, basically confirming that they accept the payments, they're not going to bring any claims, they're going to move forward. You as an organisation know that, yes, okay, you paid a little bit more, but you perhaps done it with a better taste in the parting for the individual, and probably more importantly, you've got the security of knowing you're not going to have any claims brought against you.
Yeah. And something, sorry.
No, you go.
No, I was just going to say, something we support in the settlement agreement are employability reports. So we actually look out to the market for somebody who has had to be, you know, made redundant, and we help the employer and the employee understand what period of time it would take for them to find another role. So actually, if an employer wants to give that little bit more, if they can show the employee that they've actually scanned the market, analysed how long it would take them to find another role, and offered that, maybe even a little bit more, then again, they've done something which is above and beyond, but hopefully goes a long way for goodwill.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it's a lot of it is how you communicate. You know, if you slap a settlement agreement down in front of somebody and say you're going to be made redundant, but when you off, that's done so well, which is essentially what being, you know, whereas if you've started to go through a process fairly, you've kind of got them on board with what you're doing and why, broadly speaking, and then you talk about, okay, look, we are in this situation. It is really difficult, but these are things we can do to make it a little bit better. Absolutely. Then hopefully you leave with that right attitude, right approach from everybody, better parting, better for your survivors, and all
positive
the rest
footprints. Indeed. Well, I feel like that was a whistle-stop walk through redundancy and where we are in the world today. We've actually hit the full 45 minutes today, which I try not to do every time, but it is such a big topic, isn't it? It is such a big topic, and thank you, Emma, for walking us through it in quite, you know, in quite clear and simple terms for anyone watching. Hopefully they've got an indication and an understanding of redundancy as a tool. But as I said earlier, if there are further questions, please do reach out to us, and we'd love to hear your specific scenario and love to help you with that. I think without further ado, it's time to say thank you, Emma. Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone joining today. We'll see you.
Thank you for having me. It's lovely to see you all.
Always a pleasure to have you. And we'll see you again in a couple of weeks for the next webinar. All the best. Bye all.